Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. And today we'll be talking with Micha all about collaborative notebooks for debugging your infrastructure. If you don't know, Micha is the founder of Fiberplane. He previously exited a company focusing on CI/CD to Oracle. Micha also has dedicated his career to improving the workflows of developers. And now with Fiberplane, he's building a collaborative notebook platform for DevOps and SREs. So we're going to dive deep into this, and you don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Hey, Micha, welcome to the Guild.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Awesome. Before we get into it, is there anything I missed in your bio that you want the Guild to know more about?
Yeah, I also run a fund called MP Hard Ventures, which is focused on investing in pre-seed and seed dev tools, infrastructures, building block for tomorrow type companies. So, cool. Same wheelhouse.
Yeah, nice.
But then on the investing side.
So that brings to my first question. It's not even related to what I was going to ask you. I'm always curious to know how founders, they sell something to Oracle. Sounds like you invest in other companies. Why start up another company?
Yeah, so I guess sort of the origin of Fiberplane came from, I would say, sort of our frustration and that we experienced in the previous company, which was Worker, but also inside of Oracle, and then specifically around sort of debugging our infrastructure. So it's and we can dive into that more, but I'd say sort of this sort of this thing crunching away in my head, and some of our struggles that we had was like just I wanted to pick it up and start a new company around it.
Great. So the company was, I guess, origin that you sold to Oracle or was CI/CD based.
Yeah.
This sounds like more of an SRE solution. So I guess the first thing, it seems like a lot of companies are going cloud native. How has that changed maybe the landscape of DevOps engineers that maybe were solely focused on CI/CD and now maybe SRE? What things are they struggling with now that you think maybe they weren't struggling with before?
Yeah. So I'd say, Kubernetes and containers and, even serverless, I think they've become more prevalent. When we started Worker, the previous company, we were super early in that sort of container journey. The original version of Worker was actually running on LXC, not even Kubernetes. There was no orchestrator. Once Docker came on the scene and Kubernetes, we completely moved to that. And that was around, I think, like 2014 when we made that move. Initially on CoreOS Fleet, so we were using containers, but there was no Kubernetes yet. And then later on, I think 2015, 2016, going full on Kubernetes. So I think the Worker story is sort of indicative of what other companies are experiencing now. It's like, well, great, we're full on containers, we're full on Kubernetes. And now we got a bunch of new problems, right? And then specifically around the observability and SRE space.
So does it also make it more complex for debugging applications and services as we go to cloud native because maybe they're not all under your control?
Yeah, exactly. So that was actually the reason. Well, one of the reasons for starting Fiberplane was how hard it is now to debug your infrastructure, right? So one of the challenges that we had at Worker and inside of Oracle is like, great, we're running the CI/CD system. It's composed out of a bunch of microservices running in a multitude of containers, abstracted on top of AWS, all these layers of abstraction, multiple moving parts. Like, how do you reason about your infrastructure and all these services running inside of it, right? And that for us, was quite a challenge because we were doing CI/CD, so we were running users' arbitrary code inside of this distributed system, and that makes up for some great downtime occasionally, or incidents or stuff that we need to debug. And so that was part of our frustration. Like, we need better tools to sort of to reason about this stuff, and that was sort of one of the reasons just to start a new company.
Nice. So also, I think maybe before cloud native, maybe you didn't find issues as often as you would in production, and therefore people maybe didn't debug or test in production as often. Is that another reason why you see a need for a solution for people to be able to do production-based, not development, but production-based debugging and things like that?
I think to some extent, I think also the in CI/CD is sort of the the move towards agile, whatever that means, that has sort of accelerated the need for that as well, right? We're building these things very fast. Instead of going from this sort of 1.0 to 2.0 version, we're doing these incremental updates. Developer velocity has increased. You are testing in production, right? Sort of. Obviously, you shouldn't do that, but we're moving quite fast, and that also has resulted in sort of this need for better tools.
Right. So, I don't know where I saw this, something to do with dashboarding. A lot of companies focus on a dashboard, like one place where everything can be done. And I thought you had a blog post maybe on something on the single pane or the myth of everything in one place. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that's sort of one of our, part of our thesis and sort of DNA of the company. And this is not to bash on the dashboarding companies out there, but dashboards are great for when in advance what you're going to measure, right? What effectively means what can go wrong, right? It's sort of this cockpit view of your infrastructure. You've set it up in advance. You've reasoned. You thought every scenario through. You've reasoned about everything, and you put this into a dashboard. And then nowadays maybe less so, but originally people would put it on TV inside the office that nobody looks at, right? And I think nowadays, and that's again part of our thesis, that that's great for the known knowns, but not so great for the unknowns, right? And the unknowns are more prevalent now because of all of the reasons that I just mentioned, right? Sort of these move towards microservices. We're running things inside of containers. It's this sort of orchestrator system like Kubernetes that's, scheduling all of these things. We've got users acting on our services, right? You don't know everything in advance. So what we're thinking is that, you need a more explorative form factor to reason about your infrastructure and your services, right? And sort of, obviously inspired by Jupyter notebooks and, the data science space. Let's use this notebook where we sort of can gather all these different, your metrics, your logs, your traces, but possibly also other types of data, your deploys, your builds, and then put that in this explorative form factor, and then reason about it.
And so I assume that helps with collaboration. Is that one of the big benefits? This helps with SRE collaboration? Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to, I guess the other origin point of the company is that, okay, great. This better form factor for looking and debugging your infrastructure. That's one thing. But the other thing that I thought was striking is how we've benefited from all this collaborative software out there, right? Notion for productivity, Google Docs, of course. We got Figma in the design space, Framer for building websites in a collaborative manner. But it's quite weird how actually developer tools and then specifically DevOps tools have not really benefited from this move towards collaborative software. I think, honestly, like the things that we got, right? We got the pull request, which is quite old by now. I think, since GitHub came around. And, we have pair programming, collaborative programming, right? In Visual Studio Code, Live Share, some of these collaborative IDEs. But other than that, we haven't really benefited as a sort of industry, right? DevOps or developer industry from this whole move towards collaborative software. So that's the other piece that we bring to the table, is that explorative form factor, but then also in a collaborative way, right? Where you can mention people, as you would in Slack. You can sort of start discussions. You can assign people, and you have this, sort of system of record and shared visibility into your infrastructure, and then how people are working on that infrastructure or reasoning on that infrastructure.
And I assume the reason this is also critical is, like you said, with the dashboard, it's like known knowns. SREs, a lot of unknowns, what's going on in production. So maybe you need this real-time type of collaboration. And is that why this is so important?
Yeah, and I think the other piece to it is, the status quo of you and I perhaps looking at an issue inside of our infrastructure is, you start a Zoom and you share maybe your Datadog screen, which is another dashboard, and then you and I talk over it, right? That's the status quo right now. I think also COVID accelerated that thinking quite a bit. Like, okay, we need collaborative software, right, front and center, to do this in a more collaborative and shared visibility and transparent way.
So I guess to really be able to dive into this more, I guess we need to talk a little bit more about Fiberplane. What is Fiberplane? And then maybe we can say how that helps with collaboration or tools like Fiberplane helps with this process.
Yeah. So imagine very much a Google Docs like environment, right? You've got this a writing, collaborative editing experience. That's sort of one thing, right? And I can like Slack, as I mentioned, or Notion, you can mention people, tag people. You've got your basic writing capabilities. Then where it gets interesting is we have the notion of what we call providers, which are effectively plugins that allow you to fetch data from your observability stack, right? So we support, for instance, Elasticsearch, where you can fetch your logs. We support Prometheus, where you can fetch your metrics. We've got a Sentry provider as well, and a few others up our sleeves. So this allows you to sort of suck in all these different metrics, logs, traces inside the notebook form factor. Present this type of data, be it in a chart that is like real time. It's not a screenshot, right? Like, or an iframe. That is an actual Fiberplane rendered chart of your metrics. Or we allow you to get some logs in there, display them, filter them. Also sort of highlight them and sort of say, hey, these log lines seem interesting. That could be the culprit of the thing that I'm investigating. You're able to sort of save that and build up that system of record. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what Fiberplane is. Then on top of that, we have templates. So very much like a Notion or any other type of sort of productivity type piece of software where you can sort of codify that knowledge as a template or as a runbook, right? When you're running a sort of investigation, go through these and these and these steps. But also, before you dive into anything, at least look at these and these charts, right? Or these logs by default. And you're sort of able to codify that inside the template and, render these charts or logs beforehand. So a great example here would be, say a PagerDuty alert goes off. That's something that we integrate with. Automatically a notebook gets created based off a template where you've maybe codified, the service name that is down, which could be like the billing API. Then we're able sort of to render some charts related to that billing API, give you some logs related to that billing API, and then get in the right people inside the notebook, and then start debugging that thing.
So it sounds like it saves a lot of time for triage because it's only bubbling up the charts that are specific to that type of incident. And then does it automatically alert people that maybe are tagged for that type of incident so you know who to even get on board to help collaborate with?
Yeah, so right now, indeed, within the product, within Fiberplane itself, people get notified that they should do something. You can sort of codify the ad mentions as part of the template that, always Joe should be in this thing, and help out. Very
nice. So does it do any sort of automatic triaging for you as well? Because it has all that data. Does it bubble up insights and say, it sounds like it'll throw in the correct charts or places, but does it do anything that says, hey, maybe you need to look at this. This has been the way it was for the past month, but now we see a spike here. So that's where you should start looking at or collaborating on.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we're doing anything in the ML ops vein yet, where we sort of make suggestions, based on certain data or spikes that we see. What we do support is another good example of like the provider model, the integrations is where you're capable of actually pushing events. We have an eventing API push events to Fiberplane, right? And a good example here would be deploys. So say you are using GitHub Actions for your CI/CD, and you're doing deploys. Each time you do a deploy for your service, you're able to sort of actually call an action, a Fiberplane action that we've built, and it sort of pumps in that deploy data, maybe with some labels attached to it as well, which is another sort of powerful concept within Fiberplane. Sort of label that event, it's the billing API, it's this version, and what you're now capable of doing is sort of overlaying the events with the metrics, right? So now maybe you see some kind of spike of 500s, and then before the spike you see a big fat red line, which is your deploy. Now hey, maybe these things are correlated, right? Like I just did a deploy of this service, the 500 error rate has gone up. Maybe these are related. So at least give you, being able to correlate these different data types, right? That's an important concept inside Fiberplane.
Cool. So this whole concept of templates, I assume it's good for incident responses. Are there any other uses for templates that you see been popular?
Well, I think the incident response is one thing. I would say sort of run books, like how we sort of need to perform certain actions to our infrastructure, which might not always be an incident, right? Maybe some kind of upgrade or rollout. So you're able also to codify best practices, processes within your organization as a template, right? And that's not just useful for this incident response use case, but also maybe for onboarding, right? New people join the company or new people join the team. This is sort of the process that we go through when we deploy a new service. So you're also sort of capable of codifying that knowledge and building up that system of record.
I think we also talked about how maybe a lot of tools around observability and monitoring kind of are in siloed environments. So it sounds like this also helps unlock that for the whole team to get these insights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other piece, right? Where for your logs, you go to Kibana, and for your metrics, you go to Grafana or Prometheus. This sort of brings in all these sort of different data sources into one form factor and one space to work, and again make it actionable with through collaboration.
And this is different than a dashboard because it's real time, specific to what's happening in your environment at that time.
Yeah, I think dashboards are still great for information gathering, right? I think if you look at sort of the categories of observability, you've got the alerting piece, the notification piece, right? With PagerDuty as an example, you've got Datadog in the dashboard space, or Grafana, where it's great for information gathering, looking at that cockpit view of the entire system. But when it comes to action and you need to do something, having actionable intelligence related to that specific service across different types of data, and again, it could be metrics, logs, traces, but also as I pointed out, right, we support sort of this eventing mechanism. Allows you to sort of have all these sort of disparate types of information into one place and make it actionable.
Very cool. How long has Fiberplane been around for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think we started the company around 2 years ago, a little under 2 years, with not a single line of code written. So we've been building for quite some time. In all honesty, there's also a lot to build, because we're building both, to be honest, like this sort of rich text editing environment, right, as you would come to expect from a Notion or a Google Docs, but at the same time doing this infrastructure piece. So we're kind of building two startups at the same time, I would say. Turns out building a rich text editing experience is not trivial. So we've invested, a lot of time and effort, building our own editor. As I said, sort of the provider, the plugin model, being able to gather the different data sources of these different systems. There's a lot to build.
So there's a lot to build. So Is the reason why you didn't have a line of code is because you wanted to learn as you go along rather than have a preconceived notion of what people want? Like, did you have a preconceived notion of what you were going to build? And then after 2 years, like, oh, wait, after watching the customers use this, we realize it's actually here is where they really need help with.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we had this sort of thesis around this form factor. And, when we spoke about Fiberplane, you can almost like visualize what that means, even if you say like collaborative notebooks for DevOps and SREs. So you can kind of fathom what that could look like, right? But then indeed, we did a lot of customer discovery and talked to a lot of companies and how they're dealing with their infrastructure, how they've set it up, how they're dealing with sort of incident response and debugging their services, what types of tools they're using, all of that. And then, we sort of adjusted the roadmap accordingly, and this is where we are now.
Cool. So we're almost in the end of October. So I always ask people this, regardless of what the interview is. 2023, is there anything you see on the horizon that maybe site reliability engineers need to be aware of, or maybe get on board before it takes off?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Fiberplane will be coming out in a couple of weeks. So I'm very excited about that. So we'll be doing sort of our launch, so people can sign up, take it for a spin. And then particularly, we're super interested in getting feedback around what providers, right? What plugins are people interested to see? So again, right now we've got Elasticsearch, we got Prometheus, we got Loki, we got Sentry. Perhaps CloudWatch has been a much requested one in talking to sort of our first users. So very interested to hear from the folks out there what they want to see in terms of new integrations to build.
So what's the model going to be? Are you going to have like an open source version? Is it all a paid solution? Is it both?
Yeah. So initially, it will be freemium. You can just take it for a spin, and then I expect us to sort of introduce the business model in the new year. We've got some ideas on what that should look like, but obviously also very keen to get feedback from the users and sort of talk about pricing and what seems reasonable and all that. And then on the open source front, we will be open sourcing our provider stack, sort of plugin model, sort of the SDK provider development kit to build new providers, open sourcing our templating stack as well. Alongside our CLI, which we haven't really talked about yet. So we also have a companion command line interface, which is quite interesting. Like apart from the usual stuff where it allows you to interact with the Fiberplane managed service, you can create notebooks and initiate publish templates and initiate triggers and create notebooks from the triggers, all of that. But it also has two interesting features called FP run is one thing. So, and this is for a scenario where usually like when people are debugging their infrastructure, there might be in AWS and dashboards and all of that. But usually they also operate from the terminal, right? Like they're behind their notebooks and typing things using all these different command line tools to interact with the infrastructure. Like kubectl is a good example, right? But the downside of that is, like, from a team perspective, I have no idea what Joe just typed to sort of help get the system back to normal, right? So we've got this thing called FP run, which allows you to pipe the commands to a notebook, right? So you're able to sort of pipe kubectl, get pods or get logs, and able to sort of pipe that into the notebook. But on top of that, we kind of can parse the data. So we, instead of just like rendering plain text, we can understand that, hey, this is actually a log, and we're able to sort of visualize it as a log. We're able to sort of filter it and as you would sort of in a logging product. So that's interesting. And then the other thing that we have is shell to cells. So imagine the same scenario, but this is more for long running sessions, right? You're doing a bunch of stuff from within the terminal. You're able to sort of record that entire session, all the commands that you're typing, for prosperity. So, your teammates can later see, hey, this is sort of the path that Joe went through.
Oh, that's cool. It's almost like a knowledge base. So if incident happens again, you're like, wow, all right, this is what fixed it before. Can you replay it and it will automatically type the commands again for you and all that?
Yeah, exactly, right. And sort of codify that process.
Nice.
And indeed built up that system of record. And then, of course, maybe you can save that as a template. And now, indeed, next time something happens, you know what to do.
Love it. So is there anything else we missed for functionality? The command line sounds like right up in the alley for developers. They're always using the command line. This seems like a just normal extension.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think we covered most of it. So the providers, again, we're starting off with obviously observability tools, so support for Elastic, Prometheus, and as I said, CloudWatch is coming up. But it's going to be interesting, looking into non-observability providers, right? So GitHub as a great example. Obviously, looking into Slack as well. We're able to sort of interact with Fiberplane from within Slack.
So, as I mentioned in the pre-show, I am not a site reliability engineer. So, if a site reliability engineer is listening to this, so what is the grabbing thing you find make people gravitate towards Fiberplane or would want to try it out when it's officially released? Is it like one game-changing functionality you think a site reliability engineer, when they hear it, they're like, oh, that makes sense. I need to get my hands on this.
It's just easy to get started with it, right? Like it's a very friendly, if you look at the product, like it's a very friendly environment, which actually, geared toward perhaps stressful situations, right? If something is down or you need, a sort of tagline that we use a lot, sort of when everything is on fire. It's actually a very pleasant experience to use. Because it looks very much like a sort of consumer enterprise product. Has that very great usability, good developer experience.
So it seems like if a fire alarm goes off, rather than looking all over, okay, where do I look? Where do I start? This will help, get them in line on what to focus on.
Yeah, and as a team, it allows you to remain calm and collected.
Nice, love it. Okay, Micha, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their SRE testing efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
Good question. Well, you can contact me via Twitter. I'm at Mies, M-I-E-S on Twitter. And Fiberplane is, at Fiberplane on Twitter. So feel free to reach out, shoot us a message. And in terms of, advice or just sign up for the product, I would say. We're happy sort of to do an onboarding call, get the feedback, curious to sort of to see you go through it, and looking forward to help us inform our roadmap.
Thanks again for your performance testing awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/P102. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try Them Both Today link under the exclusive sponsors section to learn all about SmartBear's two awesome performance test tool solutions, Load Ninja and Load UI Pro. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate and review it in iTunes? Reviews really do matter in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. I'm Joe. My mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack performance testing awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.